We're going to have two speakers. They're going to give their speeches, and then after the speeches are done, we're going to have a little break. So we're going to set up the program for Lance. And matter of fact, Lance is going to evaluate both the speakers before we take the break. Any questions for our members? Rick, you ready? Rick Rhodes is our first speaker.
Rick Rhodes.
He's Rick Rhodes.
Yeah.
I got Rick in my mind. Our next speaker is given his fifth talk from the Storytelling Manual. He's actually going to finish this manual tonight. This talk calls for him to bring history to life. He loves to dig up history in the heroes in the past. Little known facts and touching stories that have moral implication for us today. Tonight he's going to distill in us in a 7-minute speech one of the centuries, 19th century American history, what happened to the Cherokee Indians during the first part of the 19th century. Please help me welcome our competent communicator, and tonight he reaches bronze level, our fellow Toastmaster, Rick Rhodes.
Thank you, Jeff. How many folks think that the Native Americans living here a long time before the Spanish arrived in 1492 were doing fine, and how many think that about 80% of them died because of white man's disease? Okay, we have a starting point. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, Toastmasters, all the guests, and dignitaries, and the like. I am not a bleeding heart liberal, but the story of the Native Americans is poignant, tragic, and bloody. And in 10 minutes, I'm going to focus on one particular group, the Cherokee Indians. The Cherokees did everything the white man had asked them to do, and they still got the raw end of the deal. Most of the Native Americans in the eastern United States got a pretty raw deal. Different story out west. But back about when Columbus arrived, the Cherokees lived in an area basically, about the size of Montana, in Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, all the way to South Carolina, Alabama, and Georgia. 200 years later, the area was about the size of Massachusetts, basically centered in northwest Georgia and a little bit of North Carolina. And they did everything the white man asked. They built schools, they built roads, there's a handout that Tom's going to pass out too. They dressed like Americans, they got rid of the hunter-gatherer ways, they became tradespeople, they even developed an alpha-written language. No Indians, the Indians had their own languages, but within, a couple of years, took one guy 12 years, his name is Sequoyah. He developed what they call a syllabary, where they take a spoken language and make it a written language. And you can learn it in about a week. The Cherokees in North Georgia, 80% of them could read and write this Cherokee language, while 10% of the people living nearby in Georgia could not. Amazing, amazing. They did everything. They became Christians. If you look at the handout there, they did everything they asked, and they still got shafted. What happened to the Cherokees? Well, back before this all happened, back in the War of 1812, there was a battle in southeast Alabama called the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. And the Cherokees saved one general's butt back then. His name was Andrew Jackson. And he never gave him any credit. He went on to win the battle in New Orleans and 16 years later to become the President of the United States. And there was pressure in Washington to take the Cherokees' land. Back in about 1829, there was some gold discovered in Cherokee lands in North Georgia and southern North Carolina. The governor of Georgia, named George Gilmer, had some rather nefarious designs, and he wanted to strip the Cherokees of all their civil rights and get that land. Cherokees were basically, they could be murdered. All their civil rights were slowly being stripped. And no civil rights at all. Cherokees would be murdered and have no recourse. But the Cherokees, being relatively educated, sent some people to school up in New England. Some of the brightest and youngest and they became educated to come back down to the Cherokee lands of Georgia. And what happened was a couple of them fell in love with some white women up there in Stamford, Connecticut, and they said, none of this, you got Cherokees can't come up here. But a couple of missionaries became good friends, also in Connecticut, with the Cherokees. And they said, you know what, we're going to go down there and help the Cherokees. So we're going to go down to Georgia and help these Cherokees out. So they did. Well, the governor of Georgia is getting more and more nefarious all the time. His name is Gilmer, and he's planting all these things to take away the civil rights of Cherokees. And when he did, he passed a law that any missionary or anybody else that's doing business on Cherokee land must get a Georgia license. The only reason this was done, so they could deny it. Anybody helping the Cherokees would be denied. So that was the plan. So Gilmer passed this law, the state of Georgia passed this law, and nobody could go down and help the Cherokees without being threatened to go to jail. Well, 11 missionaries did go down there, and they were immediately thrown in charge, and 9 of them accepted a pardon. 2 of them would not accept the pardon. One of them was a guy named Samuel Worcester. Another was Eliza Butler, Dr. Eliza Butler. They did not accept the pardon. Why did they not accept the pardon? We thought this laws of Georgia were just ridiculous. You never hear this from anybody else, but you hear from me. I think it's kind of ironic that the people of Georgia, the Georgia militias are really bad folks out here. 33 years later, in the American Civil War, there's a little poetic justice here. There's a general named William Tecumseh Sherman, my second favorite general of all time. And I think it's interesting, his middle name is Tecumseh, an Indiana boy. And he goes down and he burns Georgia during the Civil War 33 years later. And I say he didn't burn it hot enough. But I'll tell you why. What the people of Georgia did to the Cherokees was just awful. So the Cherokees, two missionaries, Butler and Worcester, were sent to prison. And they did not accept pardons. Why did they not accept pardons? So they could get this case to the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court. Eventually they did in 1832. It went to the Supreme Court, and Chief Justice Marshall said, basically, the Cherokees are a distinct community, and with its own self-government, and should not be subjected to these laws of Georgia, these very capricious laws of Georgia. The Cherokees had won. They had learned the white man system. They beat the white man at his own game in the courts of law, even in the U.S. Supreme Court. What does the U.S. president do? His name is Andrew Jackson, whose butt was saved by the Cherokees in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. Well, Justice made his decision, Chief Justice Marshall. Too bad he can't enforce it. We are a country of laws. We have 3 branches of government. We have the legislature, which makes the laws. We have the court system, which basically interprets the laws. And we have the president, the executive branch, the chief executive officer. They call him commander-in-chief. He's supposed to enforce these laws. President Andrew Jackson was not going to abide by the laws of the Supreme Court. Can you believe that? In this country, only 160, 70 years ago, a president could get away with that. Personally, Andrew Jackson, I really don't care for. Every time I look at a $20 bill, I got to turn over and look at the White House. He seems like he's on the wrong side of every moral issue out there back then, including people who fought against slavery, people packing his friends in the government, and all that type of thing. So the Cherokees thought they had won, and Andrew Jackson basically says, no, we're not going to do it. So the Cherokees were getting divided at this time into 2 factions. One of them is saying, the educated faction, which is the 3 people you have on your sheet, was saying, you know what, this is really, really bad. Let's get out of here while we can. That was 10% of the Cherokees. The other 90% said, no, this isn't going to happen in the United States. It's 1830. We're a modern country. It can't possibly happen. Nothing bad can possibly happen to us. Well, 10% of them left. They left early. And they went on from the nice forested mountains of North Carolina and Georgia into the dry land of Oklahoma. And the other side, led by another faction named John Ross, who was only 1/8 Cherokee himself. He said, they won't do this to us, so he kept trying to get a better deal. Never got it. Anyway, they had to move, and part of the Great Trail of Tears where 5 Indian nations had to move out. The first general in charge was a guy named John Wool. Pretty good guy. He was pretty disgusted what he saw. It was the U.S. military and the Georgia militia. His enemy was the Georgia militia, not the Cherokees. He started feeling sorry for the Cherokees. And he was relieved of his command. And General Winfield Scott later took on the role of getting the Cherokees out. 16,000 Cherokees left North Carolina, Georgia, put in the stockades. Anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 died in the stockades. They were filthy, nasty, rotten places. Another 4,000 to 5,000 died on the Trail of Tears. Terrible, terrible. A quarter of the population, possibly more than that, was decimated by these policies. When that first group got to Oklahoma, they settled down. The second group came 2 years later, the much larger group, headed by this fellow named John Ross. And he did not like the others hanging around, so he tried to consolidate power. The three most far-sighted Cherokee leaders, you'll see them on your paper, all look like everyday people, were assassinated by the other group of Cherokees. The most educated and brightest Cherokees were assassinated by the later group. They blamed the whole thing on this first group that left, who was the more far-sighted one. The man who led the far-sighted his name was Major Ridge. His name was a path killer in Cherokees. He got his name in the Battle of 1812 with Andrew Jackson, Horseshoe Bend. He distinguished himself in battle, and Jackson promoted him to Major. He was so proud of that he made that his first name. Today, in the American military, no ethnic group has more stronger presence of giving more per capita to the country than Native Americans have. And look what we've done to them. They have a warrior class, they have a warrior mentality, but it's an honorable mentality. I will leave you with this, a quote by Clarence Darrow. True patriotism hates injustice in its own land more than anywhere else. Thank you, Jeff.